All right. I'm curious to know, is anybody old enough here to remember any of these pieces of equipment? Anybody remember the intercity rapid transit that used to go between here and here? You do? Okay. You weren't born in the 60s then, were you? Which did you remember? Not the NOT&L, the big interurbans, but...
I remember the trolley tracks out here.
Oh, that went down the middle of Lincoln Way all the way over into West Tusk and down into downtown Canton. Double tracks. Right, okay. One person, anyhow, that's remarkable. You remember, okay, wonderful, yeah. It was called the Intercity Rapid Transit, and that was towards the end. Oh, you remember that too? Yeah, it ended in 1940. Yeah, just before Pearl Harbor. That's when it all came to an end. All right, I'm calling this the rise and fall within 40 short years, if you can imagine this fabulous infrastructure that we used to have called interurban transit, electric transportation. It was gone within 40 short years. But what I've discovered by giving this talk a number of times, what I should have called it is this, because it's indicative of what happened clear across the United States. It wasn't just here in Stark County. It's how the United States of America lost having the greatest public transportation infrastructure in the world. We really did. It was incredible what we had, as you'll see what I'm going to try to show you. And we lost it to the lowly automobile. Now, there were some other things involved, things like buses and tires, the Akron rubber industry, Standard Oil, Rockefeller. There were some things that brought it to a close besides the automobile, but mainly we're the reason we lost this great infrastructure because we humans wanted our private transportation. And of course, then we had the interstate system that came along with Eisenhower after the Second World War and things like that added to it. And where Europe has, even after 2 world wars, they have the most wonderful infrastructure. Has anybody here traveled in Europe on the trains? You know that. It's remarkable. You can go to every little nook and cranny and little town and village, either with an interurban electric transportation or trains. It's just a fabulous thing. We're different. We're a whole continent, so we can't blame anything in particular. It's because of who we are as Americans. We're a different breed. Anyhow, it's been lost. And I'm going to show you up through the 20s. What we had, though, was we had the world's greatest public transportation system. Truly remarkable. In 2017, what are we? America is number 16 on a list of 20-some countries. We're not even in the top 10 in the world as far as having a decent, not a good, even a decent public transportation system. It's really a shame. But that's who we are. The world's best public transportation systems today. We've got Hong Kong is number 1, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, then comes, I always pick the wrong one, hold on just a second. Just look at the list and you can see what's there. And we're not even on it, which is a shame. We should be. Here we go. After Netherlands, you got Switzerland, Japan, Germany, France, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And we're somewhere down the line on the next 20. But it's just the reality of things. What we experience today is gridlock, a nation in gridlock. The trip home for major cities, whether it's Atlanta, has anybody here been to Atlanta? When you've got 6 lanes sometimes, right? Going like snails all the way for mile after mile after mile. Some people I know that work in Atlanta and live outside, like in Winder and different places to the east. It takes them longer to go back and forth to work than it is when they're at work. Now, what? Come on, we went to the moon and we're in gridlock. 50 minutes commute time. We have the world's worst, 3rd worst commute. We barely beat Romania, and yet we went to the moon. That's something to keep in mind. But okay, let's get to what we're going to talk about. What we once had here in Stark County, and it was remarkable. It really was. We started out our public transportation in 1884 and 5. We had 2 horse-drawn streetcar lines in Stark County, and one, of course, was in Canton. There were 2 lines, one from South Market to North Market. They all met here in Public Square, and one from East Tusk all the way out to the Nimisila Creek at West Tusk. That was what it began with horses. And the other one was a Lakeside Street Railway Company. Well, now, why Lakeside? You've ever heard of Myers Lake? Yeah. I live there, and we call it Myers Ocean. And here's some of the little horse-drawn cars that were there. This is at the West Tusk, where today Liberty Ford is located down there in West Tusk by Schroyer Avenue. That was the east-west line, and the north-south line had the car barns on South Market down by Navarre Road. And here it shows the horse cars down there. And that didn't last too long. That was in 1884. Here's the one for Myers Lake, and it was built by a grandson of Andrew Meyer, who was the one who founded Myers Lake. He owned 3,000 acres, everything from Fulton Road on the east, the Nimisila Creek and Fulton Road in the east, clear out to Whipple, from Avondale in the north, along Fulton Road in the north, all the way down to beyond the Massillon Canton Road, down to Navarre. 3,000 acres, the largest landholder ever in Stark County. Anyhow, his grandson built a wonderful horse farm where Clarendon Avenue is today, going up off of Tusk. That was the only way of getting into this 3,000 acres. And you take that was called the entranceway to the Meyer Estate, which is where Lehman Middle School is today at 13th Street and Broad Avenue. Here's 13th Street today. But back in those days, the glacial area, there's an underground lake under this area here. Here's the Myers Lake of the day. 13th comes through now and around the bottom of the lake. Back then, before the amusement park started up here, they had to put great piping in to pull the water out where the bug was. Anybody remember the bug over there at Myers Lake? And not the roller coaster area, but way over to the east. They had a little miniature golf course also and stuff at that east end. Tim's Tavern, about in that area. That was all underwater at certain times. And so they had to sieve that away through piping and everything. It took about 20 years to get that land usable for building and things. But originally, and that's why Meyer's grandson had to come clear out to the right to get to a spot where it was least problematic for a road to come through, a railroad. And he built a railroad from his hotel here on the lake way before the amusement park started. And he had to go out to solid ground and then bring it down to West Tusk. And that was a railroad line first. That became Wirtz Avenue, and named Wirtz because Mr. Wirtz had a farm that he bought land from Mr. Meyer about here. Anyhow, that's the story of Wirtz Avenue and this original Lakeside Street Railway. And it would meet down here, horse-drawn streetcars coming this way, and then they take the Myers Lake line, the Lakeside Street Railway, up to the lake and stuff, so that they could see horses and buy horses, stay at the hotel, and swim in Myers Ocean. So those were the first 2 beginnings in Stark County. And here's a picture of what happened out there at Myers Lake. At first, it was horse-drawn, just like the horse-drawn streetcars, but the horses it was so mucky on what's Wirtz Avenue now, especially they had big farms for carrots and celery and stuff. It was almost like the muck farms up at Congress Lake area. And the poor horses would get stuck in the muck, and Cantonians were upset with Meyer and said, stop using horses, it's cruelty to animals. So he turned it into a little choo-choo, and it was called the Lakeside Street Railway Company. And here's the little puffer belly that he had, until it got electrified then. Now, if you have any questions or comments while you go along, you can add something to this. I learn something every time I give one of my talks because there are often a lot of people that know things that need to be shared. So if you have something to share, please do it. Okay, in 1879 then, Thomas Edison enters the picture in the United States of America, and he invented a carbon light bulb. And by 1880, he worked on a plan to spread electricity to the entire nation, and he traveled throughout the nation to help certain cities install electricity. What about Canton? Did he come to Canton? You might be surprised to find out Mr. Thomas Edison became a member of the Altman-Miller-Harder family. You've heard of Altman, Cornelius Altman, Altman Hospital, Harder Bank, George D. Harder Bank, you might remember that. And in other words, here's Cornelius and his two stepbrothers, Cornelius Altman and Jacob Miller and Lewis Miller. Lewis Miller was an inventor, and he became a close buddy of Thomas Alva Edison down in Fort Myers, Florida. And they were so close because they shared so much in common with their natures and everything, and they were just good friends. And sooner or later, Mr. Lewis Miller, who was the stepbrother of Cornelius Altman, his youngest daughter, at 18 years old, was asked by Mr. Thomas Edison to be his bride. It was his second wife. He was 40 and she was 18. His first wife died, and he left with 3 children. He needed a mama and a wife, and then they had 3 children of their own. But that relationship helped bring electricity to a little town called Canton, Ohio, earlier than many other places. And by 1883, this was the last lamplighter in Canton, John B. Barker, and brought a whole era to an end because a man by the name of Cornelius Altman and his good friend James Saxton, whose new son-in-law was William McKinley, they gathered together to form the Canton Electric Light and Power Company. And this all had to do with Cornelius's stepbrother Lewis from Akron, who was connected with Thomas Edison. Yes?
Just a question.
You have to talk real loud so I can hear you.
Edison had an electric automobile. Was that around here? Did he bring
Oh, not that I know of, but that's what I'm not surprised if he did have one. I don't have information on that.
Yeah, he did
Oh,
have one.
good to know. I'm going to have to look that up. Yeah, thanks. That's what I mean. Anything like that you can share and you want to add in, please do. So, but the lighting was only for home and street lighting. But you can see this was all a close relationship. These two were close, and of course that's where McKinley came in, and Cornelius Altman ended up being McKinley's first campaign manager. He spoke German, that was his native language, and he only hired German-speaking people for his big mansion on North Market, and it was still, the language was prevalent in Stark County back in the 1880s yet. Anyhow, these were all close friends, part of a family, the larger family of the community. 2 of the first homes in the world to have electric lighting were here in Canton. It was the Altman Mansion in North Market, where the Cultural Center is today, and the Jacob Miller Mansion, Jacob being he was one of the stepbrothers, the Miller boys from Greentown, that Cornelius, whose father had died, and his mother married Mr. Miller. They all grew up together as young boys. So anyhow, this used to sit where there's a beautiful, what can I call it? I think it's called a Save-A-Lot store? Wonderful Save-A-Lot now sits where this magnificent home once stood. And I won't go into that. But anyhow, those were 2 of the first homes in the world to have electric lighting in. Not the first here in America, the first were in New York City, where Edison had his business and stuff like that. And here we are inside of the Altman Mansion, where the Cultural Center is today. This would be about where, you know where Pegasus is in the Cultural Center? It's about where the Pegasus, in the main hall to the front doors. These front doors are now down at the McKinley Museum. But anyhow, Mrs. Harder, after her father died, would never put on glass not bulbs, but chandelier type things on these pear-shaped light bulbs. She thought they were gorgeous. She loved these pears. Now, of course, we'd want them covered. But until she died in 1932, that's the way her house looked inside, this magnificent mansion with bare light bulbs. That was Tommy's bulbs, she called them. Elizabeth Altman Harder. Okay, it took till 1888, though, before a man by the name of Sprague invented what they called a streetcar motor, and he became known as the father of electric traction, Frank J. Sprague. So it was 1888 when the first horse-drawn streetcars were electrified. And here's a picture of the first ones in Stark County over in Canton. And what they were was just horse-drawn cars electrified. A motor down below, and of course the trolley up above. Here's a picture of Public Square at the time of the 1896 McKinley campaign, and that's what the little converted horse cars looked like on Public Square in 1896. By the way, when I see this picture, I can't help but smile and be glad for a man by the name of Steve Kuhn. Does that ring a bell with you? He's now redoing the old Penny's building back to its original architecture. If you're ever downtown Canton, take a look. And we're lucky to have him in our community and his love for historic preservation. Here's two of the first converted horse cars, at the West Tusk Car Barn. Two of the very first ones. This would be 1888. Now, what is a trolley? You know the term trolley. Well, a horse car was never a trolley. Why? Because a trolley, what is it? A streetcar's trolley is the round trolley. That's the trolley, this thing right here, that round thing. At the end of the trolley pole that picks up the electricity from the overhead wire and sends it to the streetcar's motor and wiring of the electricity-driven streetcar. Does that make sense? Do you now know what a trolley is and why only an electric streetcar could be called a trolley? That's the whole thing. Trolley pole and the trolley right there. And you can see this is movable. That keeps turning, and it picks up as it goes along that electric wire, picks up the electricity. What you don't learn, right, from these. That's very important. You got to know what the trolley is.
Quick question.
How's that? Yes.
Quick question.
Yes, please.
These trolley cars were AC though, right? Tesla had come out with the electric motor.
You got it. Right. Yes, it was not what Edison was all about. Exactly. Thank you. That's a good thing to mention. Some of the early people that ran the industry at that time in the Stark County, you might be surprised who it was. Have you ever heard the name Seiberling? Well, the father of the man that built Stan Hewitt, John F. Seiberling, he bought the Canton City Street Railway. He also owned Quaker Oats, Empire Reaper Works up in Akron, the Valley Railroad that came down, which was turned into the B&O. You know where Liberty Ford is on West Tusk? There was a B&O station right in the tracks there. And then the Akron-Canton-Youngstown Electric Railroad. That was John Seiberling. His son founded Goodyear, and of course the Seiberling Tire and Rubber Company. William Henry Hoover, you've heard of Mr. Hoover, of course, and he owned the Canton-Akron Railway Company. He bought that and enlarged it because he needed transportation for his goods from the factory in North Canton. And that's why it came down from Akron on Cleveland Avenue. Yeah, right down on Cleveland Avenue. And his son, Herbert W., then took over the Hoover Company after his father's death. William Henry Hoover, I believe he's the one they called Pop Hoover. Boss Hoover, thank you. Yes. Boss Hoover. Okay, and here One of the first streetcar lines happened right here, not too far away. It was located at the corner of Wales and Lincoln Way. You know where that is by any chance? Okay, well, this is the northeast corner. Wales would be right over here, and this here is Lincoln Way as it's coming down, or North Main, I think, or East Main. Didn't they used to call Lincoln Way Main Street in Massillon? Thank you, okay, East Main. Up at the top of the hill, and this is where the car barn was. There was another car barn later for the inner city rapid transit, but it was over towards in the direction of Home Depot up the big hill from the SIPO. So the Canton Division cars would leave Public Square in Canton every 24 minutes for Myers Lake. And all interurban division trains between Massillon with Lakeside Land, blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, you get the picture there. That's when it started in 1892, ended up in 1940 as the Intercity Rapid Transit between Canton and Massillon. Here's a picture of some of the open cars right up about where, you know, the big climb. They're just coming up towards where Home Depot is and everything. You can see Canton, Massillon Electric Railways. Canton, Massillon Electric Railway. That would have been in the 1890s, I believe. And here's a picture of one of their cars with the Lakeview Hotel at Myers Ocean. And this stood until 1929 when it burned, but it's on the southeast end of the lake, just before you get to what became the amusement park. You can see one of the old Canton Massillon streetcars pictured. Look how they spelled Myers Lake. M-Y-E-R apostrophe S. I mean, it's really M-E-Y-E-R. It should have had an apostrophe S because the man's name was Meyer, not Myers. But today we have no apostrophe, it's Myers Lake. That's just from usage. And here are some old pictures of Massillon you might get a kick out of. Maybe you're familiar with them. Here's the car barn again on East Main, at the corner of what is now Wales and which went up to Kendall. I think where old Kendall was up off of Wales, wasn't it? Yes. So, and here, are you familiar with the baseball park? Here's the SIPO Bridge, and here we are starting up the climb up the big hill towards the, whatever you call it up there at the very top. But anyhow, the baseball park was up. There are homes up there now. I don't know what the name of the first street is that goes up, but the baseball park looked down on SIPO Park. So you can get in your mind where that picture is. It's just before you get to the park down below. You can see it there at the top. That's probably from about 1903, 1904, early part of the century. Here we are at what you used to call City Park. And isn't there a big bank building here now at that corner? Because back in here would be where the old courthouse used to be, or not courthouse, but your city hall. Any trouble seeing where this is? Yes. You know, okay, you know where that is. Where city? No, you're shaking your head. No, City Park. That's where it's. You go south off of Lincoln Way into where, what is it, there's a little park there now too, and at the corner here is the museum. Now do you get it? Okay, you're shaking your head, yes, wonderful. Here's the Massillon Museum, I should have said that to begin with. And here is a big old bank building, I think. I don't know what they use it for now. And the wonderful bakery is back in here too. Lieberman. Is that still there, Lieberman? Lieberman. Wonderful.
The bakery is still there, but it's not Lieberman.
Okay. It's not Lieberman's anymore. Ooh. Oh, I'll be darned. Okay. Well, anyhow, here we are from the top of a building, whatever it was, where the Massillon Museum was, looking west down at Main Street. You get that picture? You can understand where we are there. Okay. Give you an idea of what Massillon looked like with the trolleys. And here's another one here down by the cemetery. The top here, and here's one I'm not quite sure of. It says, at the Wheeling and Lake Erie and the CLW Railroad. What would the CLW Railroad be? Anybody here? History buff? in Maslin that knows what the probably Cleveland something railroad crossing?
What year?
Nobody knows that? I've been trying to find out, so if you think of it before the end, come up and tell me afterwards, okay?
Somewhere along the way, the canal is part of somewhere.
Right, but this was, I don't know if this is before the canal or after the canal. I think this is, it said West Main Street, so wouldn't that be across the Tuscarawas? Up above the hill, so there must have been a railroad track that went across, west of the bridge. Okay, if you can clarify that for me afterwards, please do. I've always wanted to know where that picture was taken. All right, moving along here. So between 1892 and 1902, just think of it, 150 traction companies were adopted here just in Ohio. And Ohio led the United States in trackage installed. That meant you could go from little Athens, Ohio, up to Nelsonville on a trolley. You could look at all these things, Chillicothe. It was remarkable. Just in that short period of time, like overnight, everybody wanted to start a traction company, and we were the largest in the nation for such companies at the time. And that's when it started, the boom. And by 1908 in Canton, we had items that brought people in from all over the nation, let alone just from Ohio. We had number one, in 07, we had the completed McKinley Memorial. At number two, tourist site that drew people was the casino at Myers Lake. Where was that located in Myers Lake? On the North Shore, you know where 20th Street is across. There are 3 big homes on that property now, but for many years, up until 1935, this building stood. It burned in 35. It was a beautiful structure. And one of the last things that Mr. McKinley experienced before his assassination was a big party held for him in this building in 1901, in August of 01, before he went to Buffalo for a speech. The third, and I'll show you something about this was the City Auditorium. A lot of people are not aware that the City Auditorium in Canton was the 4th largest built in the USA when it opened in 1904. It was remarkable, and the acoustics, I'll tell you something about the fame of this wonderful auditorium. People came from Cleveland, Pittsburgh. We had a bigger auditorium than Pittsburgh at that time. Now, that didn't last forever. Within the next 10 years, they were overtaken by a lot of other cities. But the 4 biggest, the biggest was the, what was called the, I can't think of it, but in New York City, number 2 was the, out in Salt Lake City, the Mormon Tabernacle. And the 3rd largest still exists, it's down in Cincinnati, the Music Hall in Cincinnati. And then number 4 was the auditorium here in Canton.
Where was it?
Huh?
Where was it?
I'll tell you in just a second. Thank you for the question. And then number 4 was the Duber-Hamden Watchworks. And you know where that was, where Duber Avenue is? It said, the Cleveland Press said this: the grounds surrounding the Duber-Hamden Watch Factory in Canton are a veritable park of flowers, walks, drives, and beautiful lawns. They have been pronounced by the many thousands of visitors to be the finest in the world surrounding a factory complex. International tourists passing through the Central West considered that their list of observations would not be complete were they to fail to see this point of interest. And when in Canton to visit the Duber Works, the McKinley National Memorial, and Myers Lake, you can take either the Canton City car or a Maslin car from Public Square, and alight from that car at Elgin Avenue by the Waterworks for both the Duber Works and the McKinley Memorial. And when finished, then you take another streetcar from Elgin Avenue to the Lake Junction, which is now Wirtz Avenue, and transfer to Myers Ocean. Okay. So those were the 4 major. Now what about this wonderful auditorium we had in Canton. It's worth stopping for a second and talking about that. America's largest, here's the list that I was trying to tell you. The Hippodrome, New York, Mormon Tabernacle Music Hall, City Auditorium, Canton, Ohio, 1904. By 1910, that had changed, but it was famous, very famous. Here's one of the NOT&L big interurbans that used to bring people in from Cleveland and Youngstown and all over down to the auditorium. And special cars for Maslin at the auditorium doors immediately following the banquet. Here's another picture, and I'll show you where it was. And what made it so wonderful was there were no pillars in the entire building to block anybody's view. It was huge. And the acoustics, because of this ceiling and the use of wood in the building, made it, let me read you just here. The fourth largest in the nation. It cost $161,000 in 1904. It was the venue for the world's greatest singers, violinists, pianists, orchestras, lecturers, speakers, championship boxing bouts, wrestling matches, basketball tournaments, roller skating tourneys, polo matches, movies, dances, circuses, and traveling New York productions. It was the cultural and entertainment center of Stark County and surrounding areas up to 1939 and World War II. And here's a picture of the interior. No, this is not. But I want to read you this just quickly to give you an idea of the fame and why it was so famous. Have you ever heard of Paderewski? He was the world's greatest pianist. And Paderewski calls Canton's new auditorium the finest in the world. He said the final. It's a wonderful hall, said Paderewski. It is the finest hall I have ever played in. The acoustics are wonderful, amazing. Never have I played where music could be heard to better advantage. Canton should be proud. And that means Stark County. That means Maslin, all of us here in Stark County. In his travels, Paderewski had appeared in what was considered the finest auditoriums in the world. That means in Paris, that means in Berlin, that means in Moscow, that meant Carnegie Hall in New York. And he places the acoustic properties of the auditorium in Canton above them all. Oh, can you imagine? So that's why it was so famous, and that's why all the performers loved to come to Canton. And it only lasted about 30 years and then bulldozed down. But anyhow, it was too outmoded or something, but it could have been worked with. But anyhow, a lot of people aren't aware. And where was it? Well, first, here's the interior of it at a McKinley dinner in 1915. You can see how large it was. And the acoustics are, a part of it is because of the way the ceiling was. And you could hear a pin drop. It's like in the Tabernacle. Has anybody ever been in the Tabernacle out in Salt Lake? Well, you know how they can hear a pin drop when you drop. Same thing here. You could drop a pin up here by the stage, and you could hear it way back up here in the top seats. Marvelous, marvelous building. Luck. The guy who designed it was not a famous architect. Nobody from Canton. It was somebody from elsewhere. Here it is when it was torn down in 1958, when so many things were being destroyed. You can see here is the Palace Theater. We're looking down from the top. Here is old Kobacher's. Kobacher's is gone, of course. Here's the Onesta Hotel. No. Here is the old Ma Bell building. Remember, Bell Telephone used to be right across. So this today is just a parking lot, and here's what it looks like. Here's what it looks like today, across from the old Ma Bell. Here we are. There's a restaurant, I think, here in the corner. This is 4th Street. Here's 5th Street. It's between 4th and 5th. Here was Bell Telephone right here. And this is where the auditorium was. Does that make sense? You're clear where it is now? Okay. Anyhow, it's good to know what we once had and why, when we had our trolleys, why that brought people in from all over the nation. Question, yes.
Yes, please.
Speak up.
I'm trying to, how to phrase it.
There was a opera house also?
We had two opera houses, yes. We had the Schaefer Opera House that was on, across from the courthouse on West Tusk, on the south side of West Tusk. Then we had the Grand Opera House, which you know where the McKinley Hotel is today? Just down the hill going eastward, back of that building was the Grand Opera House. One of the finest in the state when it was built. It was remarkable. Anyhow, look what...
Question,
Yes.
the last transparency, between third and fourth,
Oh, yes. You want me to put it back on?
is that on Cleveland or Market?
Thank you. Good question. I take it for granted. I shouldn't do that. Cleveland Avenue, just north of the, you know where the Onesta Hotel is. Go 2 blocks north of that on Cleveland Avenue. You come to 4th Street, and then between 4th and 5th, across from Old Ma Bell. I mean, that sandstone building on the west side between 4th and 5th was the Bell Telephone Building. Okay, here's Morning Chaos at Canton's Public Square in 1910. This is probably at the height of when trolleys, we had not just city streetcars, we had interurbans coming in from Pennsylvania, from Indiana, from all over the place. By 1918, you talk about an infrastructure of transportation. It was the finest in the world. It was just fabulous. We had 5, by 1918, we had number 1 here was the canal. We still had them. We weren't using our canal anymore here in Massillon, basically by 18. 13 brought it to an end, but in the east, like Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, other canals up in New England were still being used for transporting heavy goods by water. But so we still had the canal. We also had the railroad, number 2. Interurbans we had over here, number 3. 4, we had the beginning of the end in our own personal autos right here. And we had planes, number 5. It was mostly for mail and also almost transcontinental. It was starting. So it was a remarkable time for public transportation. And it even gets better. Wait till I show you. It's astounding. So by 1920, America's vast electric interurban and streetcar network was the nation's 5th largest business, 5th largest industry, huge. And it only had a few seconds to exist yet. It's amazing. All because of our love of the automobile, basically. And General Motors plays a part, but not the whole part. When I was a kid, the story was it's all General Motors' fault and the rubber industry and Rockefeller and the oil and gas industry, but it's really us. Anyhow, just look, beside the electric transportation system, look, here's just Ohio. Look at all the little lines. Each one of those is a railroad. We were just saturated with railroads. Every single, you could go anywhere by electric transportation or by steam. It was remarkable. And this wasn't that long, far away from the horse and buggy and the stagecoach era. It all happened so remarkably fast. Canton, we had 3 wonderful train stations. We had the Pennsylvania that originally was down by Diebold, but it was moved in about 1916 up to Market Avenue. We had the B&O that used to be the Valley Railroad. We had the Wheeling and Lake Erie, used to be the Conotton Valley Railroad. That was on East Tusk. Anybody here remember the old one on East Tusk? Your young'uns. Yeah, nobody remembers. That's great. Do you remember this? Though that one that was the Pennsylvania, can you imagine that while we had all these streetcars that could take us all over the state, we had the Broadway Limited, the Pennsylvanian, the Trailblazer, the Admiral, and the General that brought people in from New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and all places west. I mean, to get to the East Coast, you came through Stark County, basically, when you're coming from the west. And you could go anywhere. Even in the 40s, I can remember going Christmas shopping with family members in New York City. And you take the Broadway Limited. It was a wonderful experience. What about here in Massillon? Here was the Pennsylvania Railroad Station. I believe it still exists, doesn't it? And you've had it repurposed. You did better than we did in Canton. Look at Navarre train station. And this would be in the 20s, the early 20s, maybe 1918. There's a sign right here on that building, and looking at it through a microscope practically, it reads as follows: connections to Pittsburgh. This is from Navarre, ladies and gentlemen. From Navarre, connections to Pittsburgh, Wheeling, Cleveland, Zanesville, Toledo, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Omaha, and all points north, south, east, and west via the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railroad. From Navarre. What a life these people had. They had choices. Are we going to go by trolley? Or one thing with trolley, there were fewer people. They had bathrooms. They had plush seats. They also had goodies that they would walk up and down the aisle and share. So a lot of people chose the electric because it was quiet and smoother often than the trains were, and they didn't have as many stops. But you had your choices. Look at little towns just southeast of Canton on the Conotton Valley Railroad. Towns like Delroy, Carrollton, Oneida, Minerva, Robertsville, you know these names, Osnaburg, before it was changed to East Canton. So it gives you the date here. And then Canton. Here it is, Canton. You could go from Canton down to all these little towns, or down to Wheeling, over to Pittsburgh, up to Toledo, Cleveland, Lorain, all the interconnections. This is just one of over almost 300 different railroads in this area. Railroads. That wasn't just the trolleys. So it was an incredible system that we had, and it's gone with the wind. In the 20s, from Canton, my dad was born in '06, and he said you could, he moaned the day when it all disappeared. He always wanted to be a streetcar conductor as a kid. And he said from Public Square in Canton, right here, you could go to Akron, Cleveland, Youngstown, Pittsburgh, Toledo, Lima, Dayton. Look at all these towns. Cincinnati, Indianapolis, which was the main center, and I'll show you why, for all the trolleys in the Midwest. From there, then you could go clear out to Denver, Colorado. But from Public Square in Canton, you had that kind of advantage. It was remarkable. Just by transferring, you'd get a transfer and go to another line. Up in Akron, you'd go to a different line, or up in Cleveland, another one, Lakeshore Electric.
How much would it cost?
Well, for the time, it would, for us, maybe a couple dollars. It was 5 and 25 cents, but you've got to figure 25 cents back then was almost like $10 today in some ways. Yes?
You also said they would go from one line to another line. Were the lines next to each other, or did they have to travel, like by...
No, well, they'd come into a town and you'd go on a different track then. They all had private trackage. They might share some common trackage in a town, in a municipality. But anything outside of the town was private right-of-ways, which made it wonderful. No traffic lights, no worrying about cars. You had to worry about, no, it was wonderful. And there were, it's not all peaches and cream. They had problems too when they had to cross over roadways sometimes, and there were accidents. And my grandmother almost got killed north of North Canton once. You had a question?
That 500 per day.
Okay, this is the great shed in Indianapolis, and 500 interurban cars per day would come in and out of that one shed, 7 million passengers per year. And this was the gathering place for other traction companies in the Midwest, from Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and stuff like that, and they'd come together there. What about Canton? Well, we had an open-air car barn, and it was called Public Square. And this is what it looked like. And you'd have the interurbans coming in from all over the place, and they'd, plus the city streetcars and the Canton-Massillon streetcars, the Stark Electric streetcars from Alliance and Salem and places to the east, Youngstown. But this is what Public Square used to be. It was an open-air car barn. Basically, there was always, my father said, always something there. And for somebody that was kids that were fascinated in these newfangled things called interurbans, they would spend hours in public square looking at the cars and the different interiors and the bathrooms and the stained glass windows in them and things. Canton's early ground transportation in 1920 had ground connection to towns in Ohio and the nation every 30 minutes. I mean, you didn't have to wait for 2 hours for the next train. If you missed one, wait a half hour and you had another one to Columbus. Or when I put this talk together in 2017, a Greyhound bus stopped in Canton once a day. Once a day, where it used to be every 30 minutes you had some kind of, we didn't even have trains anymore in 2007. It took SARTA until 1997 to be introduced really in a Stark County district. I mean, we had our local Canton car line, but you remember the big yellow buses we used to have from National City Lines and all that? Well, just think it took till the 90s to have SARTA when we finally, since 1939 to 1997 to get some form of public transit. We went to the moon in the meantime. It's just phenomenal. And I say that because I've lived in Europe and I got so used to that fabulous infrastructure over there. When I came back to the States, I felt like I came to a third world country. Really did. Two major Stark County, because that's so much a part of human life, is transportation. And when gasoline got more expensive and everything, cars, wonderful, you don't have to use your car that much. You have complete connection to every town you want to go to. Anyhow, I'm just going to show you quickly and we'll bring it to an end. Sad story of how it all ended, but we had two major lines here in Canton, in Stark County and Massillon. The Northern Ohio Traction and Light, they called it the NOTNL, and the Stark Electric Railway. So let me show you quickly what those two were. And the one in particular was phenomenal. And both of those companies, their dispatch and ticket offices were in the basement of the Stark County Courthouse. Here was the one for the Stark Electric, and here was the one for the NOTNL. So you just go to Public Square and go in and get your ticket. You could get a ticket all the way to Chicago if you wanted it by transferring right at that point with what you bought your ticket. Remember, this lasted right up until the Second World War, practically. Well, no, a little before that, but anyhow. Here's the line. What NOTNL, Northern Ohio Traction and Light Company, what that was, is they bought up all the streetcar lines between Cleveland on Lake Erie all the way down to Uricksville, below New Philly and Dover. And all of these in here, from Portage County and over to Wadsworth. Wonderful. So all these little streetcar lines are now part of this NOTNL, and it was one of the nation's largest systems right here in our backyard. No wonder it brought all these areas all the way down to Uricksville into Canton and Massillon area right here to see these, like the auditorium and the McKinley Monument, the watchworks, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a Northern Ohio Traction and Light car getting ready to go to Massillon, and from Massillon to Navarre, New Philly, and Uricksville on Public Square. Here's another you can see the difference between the city car and a big interurban. How many tons do you think those big interurbans weigh? 4 tons. Huge. And they were beautifully decorated on the inside, plush seats, and like I said, bathroom and everything, so your convenience was wonderful. And why they were beloved over the railroads in many ways. For example, if you wanted to go to a ball game in Cleveland, what the NOTNL would do here in Canton, from the car barn, they'd put 8 cars together and pack them in with people, and they served beer and wine, different things along the way. You could be drunk by the time you're in Cleveland, and you wouldn't have to worry about driving home. I mean, hey, not a bad idea. What a wonderful thing. All those together, yeah, and they had their own private right-of-way as you went north, especially north of Akron, between Akron and Cleveland. Private right-of-way off of the roads, lickety-split. They'd get up to 45, 50 miles an hour on private right-of-way, you can make time. It was a little over an hour to get from Canton up to Cleveland. They call them limited transportation. That means they only had limited stops, 2 stops, maybe Akron and a couple other places on the way. Here's the car barn that was originally just for the horse-drawn cars. From 1888 into 1902, that's not very, two decades only, 20-some years. It changed from horse car to all the big interurbans. Here was the old Dick Manufacturing Company that used to be beside there at Schroyer Avenue. Schroyer dead-ended into this building from the south. And here's one of the big interurbans that went all the way through Massillon and down to Dover, New Philly area. Here's a good example of the size of these 4-ton behemoths. Wonderful. So the bigger and heavier they were, the better the ride. Much better than, say, a Pullman car or just a regular car on a train. And here we have a picture down by the Russell Company. You're familiar with that? All the mansions on 4th Street are from not all of them, but most of them are from the Russell family. And the Russell family is part of the reason why we have the Pennsylvania Railroad coming through Stark County, through Alliance, Canton, and Massillon. If it weren't for the Russell family, we wouldn't have had that. That line would have been further north from Youngstown over through Akron. So Massillon is responsible, through the Russells, yes, bravo the Russell family, for getting that here. They saved, inadvertently, Canton, Ohio. If the railroad hadn't come through Canton and Massillon because of the Russells, a man by the name of Altman would not have come to Canton. He would have gone to Akron to start the Ball Altman and Company. So that's how important the Russells are to the development of Stark County. Here's a picture at the famous trestle. No, this isn't. This is down in Navarre. And you can still see, this is just south of the little area here, and you know where this is, where everything comes together in Navarre. And just below that, when you cross the creek, here's these abutments to the bridges are still quite visible from Route 21. If you ever go Route 21 south, straight out of Navarre, look over to the right, and you'll see where this bridge used to be. This is missing, but the abutments, you'll see the stones, they're quite visible. I saw them there not too long ago. What an incredible time this was for transportation. Here's Little Beach City and the famous trestle that was down there, the NOT&L Interurban Trestle. And here we are in a place called New Philly. Here we are on Saturday in New Philly with the big interurban. And this was always numbered 55. It was people who didn't say they were taking the NOT&L. I remember my dad saying, everybody just said, I'm taking 55. And they knew where they were going. They were going to Massillon, Navarre, Beach City, and on down to New Philly, Dover. Because back then, the farmers would do their shopping by the NOT&L. They'd come up to Massillon when the canal was here, and a lot of things like that. It was really like one big community. And then this company was known as the Amusement Park Line. Have you ever heard of these amusement parks? Of course, the main was Myers Lake here in Stark County, Summit Beach up in Akron, Blue Pond Park in Akron, Sunnyside Park, Silver Lake in Akron, Springfield Lake, Riverside Park, Cuyahoga Falls, Brady Lake, and then Tuscarora Park, which still exists down in, isn't that amazing? That's the only survivor really as an actual park, Tuscarora Park in New Philly. But we're going to see a little bit about Myers Lake. But all those parks, it's really what they made their money on. And of course, people wanting to go to the auditorium in Canton and seeing the watchworks. And anyhow, here's NOT&L bought Myers Lake, and that was one of their first acquisitions, and reached by the Northern Ohio Traction and Light. Right here today is a place called Tim's Tavern. You know what that is? So it gives you an idea where this entrance was, just beyond where Tim's Tavern is over there. And the YW, or the YMCA, now Myers Lake YMCA is over to the left. And that was there, the streetcars were there till 1929. Here's an earlier picture with the old open car, and if you're familiar with the Wirtz Farm and Wirtz Avenue and the Stark County Fairgrounds, here's Wirtz Avenue today when it was a trolley line, 3rd Street coming down to Wirtz Avenue today along the south side of the old fairgrounds. That's an early picture of the trolley going down to West Tusk and then over to Massillon. Myers Lake for Massillon was probably their big place to go. Here's a picture of a big interurban turning at Wirtz from downtown Canton, right where, you know where Davies Drugstore is today? It's right here at this spot and going up Wirtz Avenue, which became Wirtz Avenue. It was really a right-of-way for the trolley lines at that time. And here we are today. Look at the one below here. Here's Tim's Tavern. We're looking, and here it is back in the 20s. 2 streetcar lines, one came in here and then circled around and came back to go down to the Canton-Massillon Road. This is the way it looked in 29, and here we are currently on the far end of Wirtz Avenue. I always get a kick out of showing this picture because look at this was a normal day at Myers Lake back in the 20s. Look, hats, ties. Look at these outfits. Women all dressed to the hilt going to Myers Lake Amusement Park. That's how we dressed. Can you imagine? I mean, we don't even go to church looking like this anymore. It's not that long ago. My dad, who lived till in the late 1970s, he still wore a straw hat. Why? Well, he was born in '06. That's what a man did. You had a hat on your head. You can see just like that. That's not my dad, but that's the way he looked. It just was born into them. Men did not go out bareheaded. And here was Summit Beach up in Akron, huge park, wonderful place. And with the interurban and everything from Public Square, all these different parks were available to everybody in Canton beside Myers Lake. You had choices that were unbelievable for a very, very little amount of money. And this is the park that still remains, Tuscarora down in New Philly. Coming to an end. So please don't fall asleep. I don't want to put you to sleep by being too long here, but anyhow, the Stark Electric was the other big railway, and it was called the Bachelor Line. Why? Because the 2 men that ran it and owned it were bachelors, never married. It was also called the Class Line. Why? Because it was Canton, Louisville, Alliance, Sebring, Salem. Class, the first class line. And those are the towns that it went to, bringing all the farmers in. And I'll show you a map to just show how it connected the eastern part of our state, the northeastern part of our state, to Canton and Massillon. Stark County was really, because of what we had to offer here, the center of what all these trolley lines made their money on. So here is Canton down here, and this is the area of what was Stark Electric Railway. And from there, from Salem, it connected then over here to Youngstown, down to East Liverpool, and all of that, then the other streetcar lines over to Pittsburgh, up to Newcastle, on eastward to Philadelphia, New York City, just keep transferring. And of course, all of this here connected in with the Youngstown lines and with one from Ravenna down. So if you had people in any of these little farms, it would made all these towns their shopping centers. Like we now see, we go up maybe to Belden Village, people come up from Dover to Belden Village and different things. That's the way it was back then, but in a different way. It's a remarkable time. And here's, just to give you an idea, here's Palace Theater with the Stark Electric coming in from Alliance and the old Belden Hotel. Here's Stern and Mann's turning the corner at in front of the old First Methodist Church here on West Tusk. You can see they're not quite the size of the interurbans that were the older ones that came through Massillon over here down to Philly, but they were large. Here's the famous Louisville trestle. Every kid in Canton had to go at least every couple of weeks, take the ride over to Louisville so they could go over the trestle. I have that knowledge from my father. It was a thrill for them. It was like a roller coaster ride when you'd go on some of these because of what the infrastructure was for these railroad lines. Talk about convenience. If you lived in Louisville and worked in Canton, a car left every 15 minutes for Louisville and from Canton, and every 30 minutes for Alliance from 6 a.m. to 11:15 p.m. inclusive. And then after midnight, from midnight just every hour until 5 in the morning. And then it started over again. Cars leave for Salem and Alliance and Canton every 30 minutes. Cars leave for westbound every 30 minutes. So anyhow, it was a wonderful system. And I know from my other family members and people growing up in the 40s that were quite old, how they would reminisce about the days when they didn't have to get in their car, when they could let someone else do the driving. But here's where it came to an end then. 1930, the vast network was almost gone. Just think, from the turn of the century, it was just about 40 years altogether. Cars and buses were becoming the transport mode of choice. Why? Affordable autos, affordable gas, improved tires, improved roads, and gridlock, yeah. But anyhow, and buses, you see, because they all had to deal. Why did streetcars leave? Streetcars used to have their own right-of-way. They'd come down the middle of a street, 6 or 7 cars. By this time, 1930, 30 or 40 cars they had to fight. So the cars would drive on the streetcar tracks, and that caused problems too. And then there was General Motors and the rubber industry and Rockefeller. So that all played a part, but wasn't the whole story. So by 1930, it's over. It was all gone. The trolleys, they turned them into diners and different things like that. Well, Europe, of course, kept plugging along, and they had all their wonderful transportation before the First World War, and then even after the destruction of the Nazi era. So NOT&L became Traction and Light became the Power and Light Company, and that became Ohio Edison. And if you're ever over at Myers Lake, the reason Myers Lake has Ohio Edison today is because they're grandfathered in. They used to be the Northern Ohio Traction and Light Company. So around us, when all the electricity around us is booming after a storm, Myers Lake, right, can be deader than a doornail. And we have to wait for Ohio Edison, who treats us at the very end of the line. But around us at Myers Lake Plaza and, different Mercy Hospital, the lights are shining. All because we are grandfathered into the old Northern Ohio Traction and Light Company. Anyhow, within 40 short years, this glorious electrified transportation era in America ended. And this was not an uncommon sight in big cities, getting rid of their trolleys to be junked and brought to an end. And in 1939-40, the last here in Canton came to an end with the Intercity Rapid Transit and Stark Electric, both together in 39 and 40. When I was a kid, the streetcar tracks were still here on Public Square and out on West Tusk by, Raff Road. You could see the double tracks in the middle, but no more trolleys. They ended in 40. And that was the end of the era. Let's see here. Here's between Canton and Massillon. Look familiar? That's why West Tusk and Lincoln Way is so wide. In the middle of the 2 lanes, eastbound and westbound, were 2 tracks, the eastbound and westbound of the trolley, all the way from Public Square out to downtown Massillon. That's the way it looked. Here, this is the last day. These are pictures that were taken on the last day of streetcars between Canton and Massillon in 1940, 41. something like that. And here we are on the final, it's July 15th, 1939, Stark Electric Railroad, this is now east of Public Square towards Alliance and Salem, became Stark Transit and went from trolley to this bus. And when it was trolley, people really complained at first because you had no potholes with a trolley. With this, you had every bump on the road just like you did in your automobiles, and you had traffic. You had to wait at traffic lights. It was like in a big car, so you had all the problems. And they finally and quickly realized what they lost in the type of transportation that they had with the trolleys. Electric, no fumes. It was a wonderful system. It was cheaper by far, but there was this thing called General Motors and buses, and it's called politics and stuff like that. And when I grew up during the 40s, this is what you would see in many towns all over Ohio. No wires up above, but tracks still. They hadn't taken them up yet, or they hadn't covered with blacktop. There were a lot of streets like that, and I'm sure there are some of you that remember that from around here, and especially if you went to Cleveland. Cleveland had a tremendous outfit of that connected all their wonderful neighborhoods together. Everybody had their own special trolley, and it kept neighborhoods sound. Once the trolleys left, Cleveland fell apart. It really did. It broke down neighborhoods. They ended up in slum areas, and it just changed the whole atmosphere of life. And this is how so many of them, we had one of these down beside the Palace Theater for years, a diner. It was an old, anybody remember that? It was a trolley right beside the Palace Theater. You had one over here somewhere. Yeah. Was it off of West Main? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But that's how they used them. And here's the culprit, one of the culprits, it's not the whole answer. We thought it was back in the 50s because they were taken to court. The General Motors streetcar conspiracy trial after World War II, GM and Standard Oil were convicted in court of trying to dismantle the nation's streetcar and interurban network by replacing it with a trackless system that used, well, my goodness, GM buses, Standard Oil, all that oil and gas, and Akron's rubber industry. Sure, they needed tires, not trackage. Just think how wonderful. Oh. Anyhow, that's only part of it. Like I say, we're the main culprit. The human desire for individual private transportation. And then came something after the war when after Hitler's Germany came to an end, and Eisenhower saw the wonderful autobahns of Germany. He thought, we need that over here too, and that's the inner birth of the interstate system. And this is what happened to the President Eisenhower. The public's craving for personal, private means of transportation. And we had the Great Depression, don't forget, and government-funded road construction. Advances were made in paving and automotive technology, a general lack of scientific evidence about the effects of pollution, what we call what's happening in the world today, such as cigarettes, smoke, and gas engine emissions. I mean, if you were anybody, you smoked back then, remember that? I bet a lot of us in here at one time smoked that don't smoke anymore. But that's because doctors smoked back in those days. And yeah, it was cool. Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. And you remember Dinah Shore. Why? See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to. Remember that? And so it was everywhere you around. It was get on the highway, get your car and see America. And good old Dinah. But that's the mentality of the era and the death of public transportation. Who needs public transportation? Well, look at the figures. In 1920, when we had the best infrastructure for transportation in the world, we were the envy of the world, we only had 105 million people. When I put this program together in 2017, it was 325 million, and gridlock. And now we're at 2024 and we have more. So that gives you an idea why we now miss so terribly what we once had. Well, guess what? In some ways, the tide is turning slowly, slowly, but what makes it most slowly is something called, have you ever heard of this word? Politics. And that's it in a nutshell. You know, you got to hate, if you're one party, you got to hate, the others are the demon of the country, and so you're going to turn down what they want and what they believe in, and vice versa. It's all about party. Anyhow, streetcars are coming back, and look at all these towns that now have seen the advantage of electric transportation within their towns and in their communities. Here's just an example of some that are coming. Here's in Denver, Tucson, Dallas, Cincinnati. I've recently been in the ones down there, and it's wonderful. The people love it. Washington, D.C.
They have them in Washington?
I'm sorry, what?
Do they have them in Washington?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Not to the extent that they once had back then, but they're starting. And it has to start somewhere. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the fall, the rise and the fall within 40 short years. That huge complex of infrastructure has been eradicated of Stark County's electrified transit. Any thoughts, any questions? I hope it wasn't too long for you. A question, yes?
You didn't tell us the,
What did I miss?
you didn't tell us what it was commonly referred to.
Could somebody say loudly what he just told me? I didn't hear it.
What did they used to call, what was like the nickname for the NOTL? What they used to call it?
Never on time.
Oh, never on time. Okay, but that's not always the case. I did hear that once. Okay. You should have said that first. Yeah. Good. Okay. And there were other problems too, you know.
Well, thank you.
Well, yeah. Does he want to make a comment?
Well,
Stand up.
no, in,
No.
In 1930, that was the first time there were more cars than horses on the road, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Sure.
Yeah, so I figured there was probably a connection between that because people were getting away from horses, and I see it today because I would not want to be riding a horse and buggy when I could be enclosed in a car.
Oh, of course.
So,
Of course.
That drove more people to
Of
cars.
course. Oh, no. But the point is, we are the reason that all disappeared. Our refusal, to take public transportation. Any other comment? Yes.
CLW Railway stood for Cleveland, Lorraine, and Wheeling.
Wheeling and Lake Erie.
No, Cleveland, Lorraine, and Wheeling.
Oh, is that what I asked about? You mean the C, L, and W?
Yes.
Cleveland, Lorraine. I'll be darned.
It was a subdivision of B&O.
Oh, very good, because B&O was on the west side, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All
Then
right.
It was bought out by Lake Erie and
The Cleveland, Lorraine, and Lake Erie one, wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
they were bought out.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, they changed names quite often, different things. Like the Conotton Valley became part of Wheeling and Lake Erie, and the valley, different things. Thank you. That's good to know. Any other? Okay, yes, as loud as you can.
Did the tracks in Massillon go west of the square?
Yes.
How far?
Well, it went up the hill. I think it went across and then up. Oh, no. What's the name of the first town west of Massillon? It went to East something.
East Greenville.
East Greenville. That's where the NOT&L ended. But most of the traffic, that was just to get farmers coming in from, the far west end of Stark County. Actually, the big interurbans went south Erie, underneath the underpass at the railroad station, past the big factory down there, and then south to Navarre and further. Yeah, but there was an East Greenville line that went west. Does that answer that? You know where East Greenville is? It's a country town, but it did take it out that far, but that brought a lot of farm people in from that area. Okay, yeah,
Just let you know that Edison's car was called the Runabout, and he produced that in 1889.
that early.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that. That's good to know. Thank you. Okay.
Is it true that when they got to the end, they actually had to change the wire to turn it, to go the other direction?
Well, yes, there used to be a Duber-Hamden trolley that came out 6th Street South and went up past the factory to get the people living out in what Duberland, which is everything west of Duber Avenue, was a product of being developed for the Duber factory people. There was a trolley that came out 9th Street, which was originally Cedar Street. And they changed, when the east-west streets were changed to numbers, Cedar Street became 9th. And the trolley went as far as Cedar School, and that's where they'd have to, the motorman would have to get out, pull down the cord at the back, and bring the thing around to the other direction to go back east into Canton Public Square. Is that what you were meaning? Thank you. Okay. Thanks very much.